In this class we're going to deal with the Michigan model. The Michigan model is seen as the hard approach to HRM, as it holds a less humanistic view. It is very much, as we will see, aimed at facilitating the achievement of the objectives of the organization in terms of efficiency and productivity and perhaps profitability. It's less concerned with aspects associated with the welfare and training and issues associated with wider HR functions as we would generally understand these. So it's very much focused on the requirements of the organization and the requirements of the organization to meet its more commercial objectives. The Michigan model focuses on business strategy and perceives employees as a resource to help the organization achieve its goal. So the employees are a resource. In a sense, they are the same as the capital of the business. They're the same as the machinery and the premises. They're a resource. They enable the business to meet its targets. So it's less humanistic in that sense. It sees the workforce as facilitating production, facilitating the achievement of the strategy of the business. This contrasts with the wider view of HR that's held by models outside of this Michigan model. They seem to suggest that the workforce must be looked after, trained, accommodated. There should be flexible working practices. It looks at many other functions. The Michigan model focuses entirely on meeting the business strategy, meeting the requirements of the strategy, and deploying the workforce in a manner that will enable the strategy to be achieved. And all of the functions of HR is to select the right workforce who will work towards the achievement of those objectives. The emphasis of the model is placed on how best an organization can use its resources to respond to the external environment. So the model realizes that the organization, the company, is perhaps in a competitive situation. There are other companies who are trying to outcompete it in the marketplace. So companies are fighting for survival. And the Michigan model aims to recruit a workforce that will help the organization to fight for its position in the marketplace by being productive, by applying themselves, and by enabling the organization to meet its strategic objectives. Some scholars have argued that the model is inhumane, and others have emphasized its importance to business success. So scholars are split on this one. Some say it's inhumane. It's looking at people as a resource. The people are, in a sense, the same as the capital equipment. They are facilitating production. Whereas others say, well, the organization has to do that if it's going to succeed. The alternative is that the workers will not have jobs. The company will go out of business and the workers will no longer have a job. So there are very stark contrasts here. Some say it's inhumane, others say it's necessary. The model is based on matching employees to business needs. That's the idea. There should be a correspondence between the skills and abilities of the workforce to the requirements of the business. It's matching the two. The HR department will be managed and maintained only to support the overall business objectives and goals, to develop employees to meet these goals. So that is the function of HR in this school of thinking. The function of HR is to achieve the overall business goals and to employ people, to employ personnel who will enable the business to achieve those goals. And the development that the HR department may do must be completely focused on the achievement of the corporate objectives. The model is based on the following key principles. Recruitment and selection of employees suitable for meeting business objectives. So only employees who are clearly suitable to meeting the business objectives should be employed. There should be performance monitoring in accordance with business needs. There should be reward for employee performance. The workers who perform well and enable the organisation to meet its corporate objectives should be rewarded. And there should be development and training aimed at meeting business objectives. So the training and development, whatever training and development is put in place, should be completely focused on meeting the business objectives. The model is sometimes represented by a diagram like this. We have a triangle. We have the company in the center. The company is central to what happens, and the objectives of the company is central. So we have the mission and the strategy of the company. We have the organizational structure, which is derived from the mission and the strategy. Once the mission and strategy have been determined, the organizational structure is designed around that to make sure that the mission and strategy can be achieved. And then of course we have the HR department, who will ensure that the right people are in place within the organization structure to meet the mission and the strategy. So it's inside the triangle, it's very self-contained. And the HR department is there to ensure that the right people are in place to achieve the mission objectives. There are external forces that operate on the organization, political forces. The organization, the company, exists in a community which will have elections and will have political forces. So there are outside forces on the organization that must be accommodated. And of course there are outside economic forces, the course of the economy, the course of key variables within the economy, inflation rate, unemployment figures and so on. And these will impact on the business. And there are also cultural forces. There are trends in society and movements in society that the company must accommodate, not just in terms of the design of its product, but in terms of its own presentation within that community. The model is presented usually as a triangle, as I just said, and within the triangle the firm is at the centre. The organisation is central to all business activities. Other factors are secondary. So the organisation is at the centre. The organisation is the most important part of the model. The company is the most important part of the model. The triangle represents internal and external factors that influence the business. Each factor is interlinked and have an influence over business activity. The business takes into account the various influences, external influences, cultural influences, economic, political and so on, but essentially the business is there to survive and make a profit, and it selects personnel who will enable it to do just that. According to the model, management decide organization's mission, the strategy and the structure. Well, there should be no surprise in that statement. That's what management does. It decides on the mission, the strategy and the structure. The model goes a little further in suggesting that the sole purpose of the personnel within the business is to enable the organization to meet its strategic objectives. So it's looking at people as a resource, as a productive resource. It's entirely focused in on people as a productive resource. HRM is then designed and integrated to meet the needs of the business. That's what HRM does. It meets the needs of the business, whatever the needs of the business are. All internal factors must effectively respond to the changing external environment, the political, the economic and the cultural. So the internal structures flex according to the external pressures. But the core concept of having employees is that the employees will help the business achieve its strategic objectives. That's why they're there. That's the core focus of the HRM department. HRM is an important element in the model. Its design and application is dependent on the business. So the HRM structure is designed around the requirements of the business, looking at the types of personnel the business requires, the type of working practice the business requires. And the HRM department is there to facilitate that. In fact, that's the only function of the HRM department, is to facilitate the requirements of the business. The Michigan model emphasizes on another important element within HRM, the human resource cycle. The human resource cycle consists of 4 functions and affects individuals and organizational performance. Each function within the human resource cycle is based on strategic control and organizational performance. So this is looking at the human resource cycle, looking at the way in which the human resources can be motivated, and looking at the whole process of the deployment of the human resource within the organization so as to maximize the return from the employment of that resource. So if we start with the selection process, clearly the HRM department will be involved in this, in the design of the selection process, in looking at the criteria, looking at the job specifications and contracts and so on. So the whole selection process will be set up by the HR department. Then, having selected the employees, there will be a need to monitor and look at performance to ensure that the selection process was correctly done and that the right people were selected, and looking at the performance of the personnel within the organization. And the way the performance is assessed is through appraisal. It might be an individual performance review or some sort of group appraisal, or it may be feedback from employees or from managers or line managers or whoever. There will be some sort of appraisal and feedback on the appraisal, and the purpose of the appraisal is to look at performance, and of course performance will be based on the selection. And depending on the appraisal, rewards and development issues will be determined. Perhaps the workers are doing a good job, but they could be further developed. Perhaps the workers are doing a good job and they deserve some rewards to give them more incentive to keep applying themselves and to further increase productivity and increase their application. And there are feedbacks on this. The development would feed back into performance, for example, and rewards would feed back into performance as well. The development that's required could also feed back into refining the selection process. There's a learning aspect associated with this. The dotted line at the bottom, which goes back to selection, that indicates that the company is learning. The HR department is learning from existing employees, learning what issues are important and what issues are deficient or what issues need to be developed. And it feeds it back into the selection process so that in future selection will require applicants to have some perhaps knowledge of a particular function or a particular skill or aptitude. So it's been fed back, and if it's fed back and the selection process can deal with that, and then the personnel are selected who have already got that skill or aptitude, then of course there'll be no need for development further on, and that's a cost saving. In the selection, recruiting people who are capable to do the job that's been defined by the structure. It's matching human resources to the business needs. That's the idea of selection. Working out exactly who are required and trying to find those people. Performance and appraisals, well, performance is the central function of all HR departments. Appraisal is designed to link performance to business objectives. So it's trying to make sure that performance is in line with business objectives, business requirements. So the appraisal is trying to work out what's happening. If there is a shortfall, why is there a shortfall in performance? If people are easily achieving the targets, feed that back to management, and perhaps the targets can be changed. The additional requirements may be added, or there may be some refinement in the types of requirements that are sought by the organisation. The rewards, well, employee motivation linked to performance and higher level rewards. It's a recognition of achievement. Rewards are a recognition of achievement. If companies reward the workers with perhaps bonuses or additional payments or particular perks, they are in a sense telling the worker that they are valued. They've done a good job and the company recognizes them, and they're getting this particular reward. Development, as I said earlier, it's training and development opportunities that enhance current performance and their competency. But it's also feeding back. If there is a big need for development, then perhaps there was something wrong with the selection process in the first place. The selection process should try to ensure that there is not so much demand or need for development. And whatever development takes place should be centered around the organisation and the requirements of the organisation. It should not be looking at generic skill development. The generic skill development is what the applicant should have brought with them when they applied for the job in the first place. That's the view. The key element in the human resource cycle is performance. All other activities are focused on enhancing employee organisation performance. So it's looking at the performance of individuals, and it's trying to ensure that the performance of the individuals meet the company requirements. So the Michigan model is trying to fulfill corporate objectives. The company decides what it wants, and the HR department takes that on board and makes it its job to enable the workforce to meet those corporate objectives. The HR department is there to select personnel who will meet the objectives. It will work with existing employees to develop them in a way that will meet the corporate objectives. So the whole emphasis of the HR department is servicing the requirements of the business. And that's all we're going to deal with in terms of the Michigan model. It's a very important model in HR. It's one that you should be familiar with, and it's one that it's worth spending some time reading about and making your own notes. It's a very important model, and you must be familiar with how it works and what it's attempting to do. Well, that's all we're going to deal with here. I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.